And we are live. What is happening, Savages? My name is Immortal Coil, and this is the second episode of Savage Spirituality. With me tonight, I have my guest.
Oh, you might want to mute yours.
There is the mic. Yeah. Technical difficulties. Hang on a second.
He's learning, guys. Give him a chance. We've all done it. Hi, everybody, and welcome to Immortal Coil's show. This is Author Stephen Walton, but tonight we're talking about some trippy shit, more on the ancient topics and things, out of this world. So tonight I am Lodonis Ravenwolf, which, in case any of you do not know, is my circle name as a Wiccan. So that is my identity when I'm talking about crazy shit, or what some people might consider crazy shit. There you go, Immortal. I was just trying to fill up the empty air.
Well, I appreciate that. I actually accidentally left the YouTube window open, so it's cycling on a 10-second delay. Yep. And I got to hear our buttery voices over and over again.
All right.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I appreciate you coming out tonight, Stephen. We've been kind of in chats and DMs and stuff, and we've borderline touched on these topics, but it's just some of those DMs aren't really like for mind expansive, self reflection. So it's going to be nice to kind of pick your brain about some of this stuff.
All right. Well, let's dive into it, man. I'm here.
Sounds good. Well, the premise of the show is to sort of look at the deeper subjects in life and some of the possibilities, some of the non-mainstream things. But the best way I figured out how to do that is by relating it to popular entertainment. And if we can have that as start of the first bridge, the first stepping stone, because a lot of those ideas were actually kind of repurposed by those shows on purpose so that people have a chance to get exposed to it. So I understand you're a Star Trek fan.
I love Star Trek.
Yeah, same here, man. And just with Star Wars being so dominating, we don't really get to talk about Star Trek too much.
Well, there's going to be more Star Trek topics coming up. We got Picard out, and it's getting mixed reviews at best. And and so we're probably going to be talking a lot more about that. I know on my channel I'm going to be covering it a lot more. I'm going to be on Friday Night Tights this week talking with Nerdrotic about it. And like when I was talking to Gary on the phone, I said, man, I don't even care about getting subs. I just want to talk some Star Trek. I love getting together with people and just talking about my favorite franchise.
Well, same here. I have exactly 0 viewers at this moment. So I don't really do this for the subs either. I just do it for the love of the topic. Star Trek, when I was a kid, my dad was always trying to get me to watch it. And I was just like, yeah. But at some point around the age of 12 or 13, it really just like infected my mind. And especially Star Trek: The Next Generation. That was some of the last couple of years that it was on the air when I was starting to get into it. Mm-hmm. So obviously
good years.
Yeah.
Those last few seasons were excellent. Roddenberry was involved in the first season and a half, I think, before he passed away. First couple seasons.
I want to say he died in like 90 or 91.
And there are some real gems in those first few seasons. Some really good episodes, but a lot of it was just the show finding its feet. But yeah, I came in on the right time, about season 4, season 5, that show really took off.
Yeah, actually, the first episode I remember watching was the one where Barkley was having transporter psychosis and all those little worm things were in the stream.
Yeah.
What is this? I think that's the one I paid attention to. The very first one that I watched was Time's Arrow, and that's when it was new. And I was just, I thought it was interesting, the idea of like Data's head in a cave and Mark Twain's in there. And
I love when Star Trek plays with classical, old pre-CBS All Access Star Trek plays with time travel. They always approached it. I mean, there were conundrums, there were contradictions, and so between some of the stories and how time travel was used and utilized in the storytelling. But they didn't always use it. When they did, they were careful about how they did. And I really appreciate that. Time's Arrow was a great pair of episodes. The guy who played Mark Twain, he was really good.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Whoopi Goldberg. I mean, again, another actress who's really good. I mean, from The Color Purple on, Jumping Jack Flash. Like I love Whoopi Goldberg growing up, and I love seeing her in Star Trek. You just one of those people you have to ignore their politics in order to enjoy their art.
I feel the same way about Mark Hamill. Whenever he's tweeting political stuff, I'm just like, eh.
What's very strange concerning Mark Hamill is that there's a very short chapter in my book that I wrote, The Phantom Menace Volume 1, where I did an homage to Mark. And then since I've written that, and since he's been saying more things online, it's getting harder and harder to ignore just how vitriolic he is when it comes to politics. And it's getting so difficult. But we're not talking about that stuff tonight, but yeah. Yeah.
Well, and there's ways that we can bridge into it. One of the things I thought was interesting about Star Trek is it's kind of an idealized utopia with a one world government, but it's not like a malicious autocratic thing. It's like we fixed ourselves up and got rid of disease and hunger and exploring the galaxy together as a united humanity.
I don't think it was so much as getting rid of disease. They still face disease, but all the nations are nation states, and they all pretty much came together in one world government, and in the most beneficial way. I mean, that's probably a fantasy aspect of it.
Sure.
Humans are still to this day as evolved spiritually and intellectually as we have become, and technologically. There's still leaps that need to be made. There's segments of populations all across the history of man and across the world today where you have these pockets of people who are very, very open to others, open to ideas, open to understanding. A lot of Buddhist philosophy. That's one of the reasons I like Buddhist philosophy. And we still have those leaps to make, and it's like I was listening to Jeremy Hambley talking about it's kind of off topic, but I was listening to him talk about what he calls crabs in a bucket, which are these other YouTubers that exist, and that their only shtick is to pull people down, and I've dealt with a couple crabs lately. You have to just kind of ignore them, and they just want to pull you down, and that's what I feel like happens in the human race. As certain segments or certain individuals begin to evolve, becoming more enlightened, more accepting, there's all these crabs around us that just they still want to hate. They still want to live in the mundane. They still want to just, be racist and hateful. And so they just want to pull everybody down. And that's why we have woke culture.
Yeah. And I also sense that there's like a social control mechanism behind all that too, because the problem with the united humanity is the same thing that it's always been. The people who want to, or the forces that want to control us, can't do it unless we're at each other's throats, and we have the perception of us and them, and so it's weird. It's like backhanded.
It is.
The idea of us not having to worry about like gender or racial stereotypes versus the implementation of it and how it's used by the people who shape our perceptions. That's one of the things I really admire about your book, and probably what sold it for me is when you went on and talked about all that stuff. Because everybody walks around and pretend like it doesn't happen, but it happens all the time.
Well, I think it's important. You have to confront problems and not try and find solutions for symptoms. It's always good to confront every aspect of a problem, but unless you're actually trying to solve the problem itself, putting Band-Aids on a broken bone just isn't going to work. It becomes systematic. That's why certain people, for instance, going back to what I usually do, there are certain segments that of fandom who think that, well, let's stop, you should stop talking about politics and we should be talking about just the creative aspect. Yes, we should talk about the creative aspect or lack thereof, but unless you deal with the root problem with the creators that have control of these things, then you're just treating, you're not curing cancer, you're just treating the symptoms of it. And you have to cure the problems. With Star Trek, what Gene did with his vision and the subsequent creators that came after him continuing that tradition was that at some point we had that World War III event, which eliminated like more than half the world's population, and people became almost like the Dark Ages, where you had the fall of the Roman Empire. Then you had various different city-states and villages that were once connected to this vast empire, and all this trade were then localized. And they only had like one type of food, and they only had their local traditions, and they had to worry about raiders, and they had to worry about all these other things, and barbarians that they didn't have to worry about while the empire was being sustained. And that's how the world had been shaped. And then it took one person, and a flawed person at that. Cochrane was a very flawed person, just to have one dream and one vision to do something, which led to First Contact, an act that unified the entire planet. We are not alone in the universe at a time when we were all very afraid and fragile. And that impactful moment, that enlightenment, is what brought together the one world government, but in a beneficial way to everyone.
Correct. I don't think at this point in our evolution, a one world government's a wise thing. And you get all these kids that want to have idealized stuff, but they don't understand their own contribution to it or what they would give up in their personal liberties if they ended up, if we went down that road.
Well, do you remember Fight Club?
Yes, I do.
The movie Fight Club, one of my favorite movies. And this is what Durden said, what Tyler Durden said about being the middle children of history in the 90s.
Yes.
That's very true. We have no Great Depression. We have no Great War. Our lives are a Great Depression. And so even though we had 9/11, which was a unifier, as horrible as it was, it was a unifier nationally and probably across the world in a few aspects, but more nationally. I talk about this before. There was that time just after 9/11 for like a year when everybody was unified. The news, however, really showed the power of the media at that point. I mean, they had before during Desert Storm, but the representation of things that were going on around the country at that point, they were, basically blackballing any mention of, there was a mosque in New Jersey who celebrated 9/11.
Right.
And the media did not talk about it at all. There were people inside the United States celebrating the death of over 5,000 people, celebrating it, and they blackballed it. They hid it. And then as time went on, they also didn't talk about, rarely did talk about some of the attacks and upon mosques across the country by other citizens. Like, they really dumbed down. They really just kept all of that under wraps. And then here we are in 2020. And for the past 6 years, they've done a complete 180 from a philosophy of understanding the responsibility of the media and understanding that what they tell the people has strong influence to how people react to a situation. And now they are putting out fake news articles. Everything is opinion. They are very bombastic. They promote the hypocrisy of promoting racist and sexist ideals while saying they're fighting these things is just beyond my scope to believe. Like, seriously, like Giant Meteor 2020. Like, that's how I think sometimes. Like, we need a grand apocalyptic event. Not killing everybody, but man, I don't want that to actually happen. But it makes you think. Yeah, it makes you think.
Scared. And that's why I think the Phantom Menace is such a powerful movement, because we're literally talking to each other because nobody else can be trusted. And no one really wants us, right? We look to Luke Skywalker and Yoda for wisdom, You know, like growing up, someone like Jean-Luc Picard was very much a central morality figure in the development of my own personality. You know, same with like Data and Worf, and you know,
Yeah.
yeah. And then to see, especially their treatment, I've heard mixed things about Picard.
Hmm.
I'm not very compelled to watch it.
I
So,
think I think you should.
yeah,
Honestly, yes, I think you should. You need to see. The more that I think about it, the more I speak with other Trekkies, and that aren't necessarily that don't people that are not hating for the sake of hating, just fans, you know. And I understood that when the initial backlash to the Last Jedi, because I was a part of that backlash, and
hmm
I understood it for what it was a cinematic middle finger. But I'd also been I'd already been given a finger by Alex Kurtzman with Star Trek Discovery. Like, that is an abomination. That is not Star Trek. That is not the
no,
ideals that the fandom wants. And so going forward, you know, now that I'm seeing Picard, which is more connected to my fandom. Like, I love the original cast. You know, I'll watch the TOS series. I love the original movies. They're probably my favorite Star Trek movies are the original movies. But but the TNG is that came out when I was a kid. I watched that with my dad. That was that
yeah,
thing for me, those characters. And so this, I have a lot more attachment to Picard, and to see the media representation in Picard is basically Fox, how they see Fox News, how Hollywood sees Fox News. And you know, they're presenting the Federation as this like racist, xenophobic,
yep,
you know, totalitarian, authoritarian, you know, it's sickening to see how much people in certain spheres, not just entertainment creators, but people in spheres of information and entertainment, truly believe that their worldview is so important that everyone else needs to have it, and so
right,
they press it through these mediums. And the other night on the Fourth Wave, you had said that's social engineering.
yes,
I call it fandom engineering.
fandom.
Yeah,
Ooh,
that's how I look at it. Because I mean, it really is. It is social engineering, but it's like fandom engineering. You know, okay, we don't want you a part of our clique anymore, so we're going to make this content you don't like, and that will attract people that we like. You know, and that's very similar to many of the problems that we have. It's actually a systemic
mhm,
problem to the use of people at the top, people pulling the strings, as you say,
yes,
the ultra rich, you know, the ones who want everyone divided beneath them, using different mediums to create chaos, but within the civilian population, within the working class, within all the classes. and
correct.
uh, and that's even the wealthy class, because I mean, there's wealthy the term wealthy class is very broad. There are people out there who make hundreds of thousands in a year, and that would be considered a wealthy class in my opinion. But there are also
Sure.
people who make tens of millions in a year, hundreds of
Oh yeah,
millions in a year. You know, so even that is there's even a separation of classes within that. And so really, we're all at the behest of this manipulation campaign that has been
yep,
happening, and it's a fight in a sphere that we don't even have any contact with, that deals in politics, world governments.
hmm
And as long as those types of deceptive people are in charge, I would definitely not want to see a world government. I don't think that it would be healthy for the human condition.
that's exactly what I mean. And a world government would play into that hand, and because there's such a dark energy associated with them, you know that they wouldn't have our interests at heart. It's probably not far out to say they're not even human.
It's, well, maybe they are very human. I mean, human beings. Just to segue off just a little bit, I've talked about. I was with Comics Division and a couple other people talking about this stuff one night, and you know, I think that we know that human beings have crossbred with Neanderthal, and there's probably a good
Yes.
chance that was also with Devenesian. Well, I think it's more spread than that. I think we are the culmination. I think we are Homo sapien, a Cro-Magnon man, but I think that Cro-Magnon man was mixed with other races of humans and other types of man. And so I think we're a culmination of that. And so as I believe that, and this is all hypothesis, this is just, my personal beliefs,
Sure.
as we are different culminations, we are truly, the culmination of various races into one overall race, that there are many different aspects, many different strengths and weaknesses. For instance, you could go to Nigeria, right? And Nigerians are famous for speed, right? And so if you go to Nigeria, you're going to have the overall class, the overall ability of, let's say, one specific town that is fast, that are good runners. Kenyans, that's what I was thinking. Kenyans that are very fast. They're very fast runners. Well, you're going to have that one person in the group who is not fast at running and may be smarter than the rest. And then you're going to have that one or two people in the group that may not be good at running and may not be like, genius level smart, but may have wonderful ability for command or organizational skills. Every single segment of the population is broken down into people who have a certain set of skills. And that also goes along with what I believe is an overall ability of that group itself, and I think that exists all over the planet. And I think one of the reasons that exists is not just evolution, not just regional evolution, but also has to do with the interbreeding of the races that came before us. And I think that also has to do with how much energy is put into the development of that society, whether that is technological or cultural or religious or so forth. And so, as much as we all like to say, we're all human, we're all red on the inside, we're all the same, we're not. We really aren't. I don't think that that's true. I think it's false for us to say that. We are all human. We are all brothers and sisters of this planet, but we are all vastly different. We have different wants and needs, different desires, different abilities, different weaknesses and strengths. And that comes from a wide array of where your ancestors evolved, if you still your regional area, the culture that you grew up in, the things that you were taught, what you were, everything from top to bottom. And so when you say something isn't very human or is very human, I think that's a very wide scope, because I truly believe that there are people in this world who are very human in the fact that they're a psychopath, in the fact that they're totalitarian, or that they are a control freak or authoritarian. But there are also people that are very human, that are giving and kind, charitable, selfless. There are people artistic. There's so many different parts that go into being a human. That's like such a big umbrella term. I think that those evil people at the top, the ones that are pulling the string, that are keeping us divided, that don't care if they put oil pipelines through your natural water resources, that don't care about drilling for uranium on your land, that don't care about who's starving in Africa, who don't care about what mothers can't feed their children in various parts of the world. These are people that are only concerned with controlling the herd. That diabolical position and authority and self-imposed authority, or bread or financial authority, is also very human. So my issue more is with people evolving into a human condition that is more concerned with moving us better as a whole, moving us forward as a whole.
As you were speaking, it really dawned on me the service to others versus service to self. So if there's world leaders that are more concerned with helping others rise instead of trying to get the biggest pile and stand on top of it, that would be a step towards that evolution. But what do you think of the idea of maybe off-world influences meddling around with political leaders and policy? Have you ever heard anything like that?
Oh, of course I have. I love delving into that area of theory or tinfoil hattery.
That's what this is about. Well, it's interesting.
You're choppy here, brother.
Yeah, it's probably the weather out here. I live in great rainy Washington, and So am I totally warbled?
Yeah, totally.
Okay, let me mute myself for a second, see if I can relocate.
Sure.
Go ahead and be charming.
I will. Yeah, I do love dipping into, coast to coast kind of stuff. I've liked watching Ancient Aliens, though I don't do it anymore. It gets pretty repetitive. There's only so many stories that you can point to and say, well, it might not be, but it might be aliens. And the influences of aliens in ancient culture, extraterrestrial influences in modern day. I love hearing, Area 51 stories. Bob Lazar is probably the most convincing of all the stories, the modern day stories that I've listened to. Bob Lazar is definitely the most compelling to me, because I can't see why a dude like that would lie about what he said. And let's
so specific too. Element 152. It does exactly what he says it should do.
You sound like an alien.
Yeah. But it's also so interesting to relate it to the Star Trek stuff, right? And the episode Darmok. Jean-Luc Picard finds himself amongst a race that only knows how to speak through metaphor. So the famous comparison was, like Troy said, it's to say Juliet on the balcony. But if you don't know who Juliet is or what she's doing on the balcony, then all the romantic sort of imagery is lost.
I can understand what you're saying, but you sound like an alien from another planet.
Might as well be, yeah. No, I've had some experiences, man. Yeah, I've seen some shit.
You might need to find another spot, buddy. It got worse.
It got worse just now.
Yeah.
Okay, hang on.
All right.
Keep going.
All right. Also, a lot of tales from ancient cultures throughout China, India. They have some pretty out of this world stories, and it's hard. One of the things that I like about watching Ancient Aliens or those guys is they do hit sometimes on a story or two that could be looked at as a more tribalistic an ancient person's view of what they would see when they saw, an extraterrestrial. But people always reach out to the extraterrestrial answer for damn near everything, and I don't think that should be the case. I am very, very interested in the pyramids of Giza all over. I mean, not just the step pyramids as well. There is a progression in technology that can be seen throughout the dynasties.
Mm-hmm.
But, there must have been some kind of a high technology that was lost.
I agree. It's very interesting that... Is the audio any better? Do I still sound like a weirdo?
Yeah, you sound weird, but it's all good.
All right. Kermit probably has a good idea. He says log out and start over. So I might have to boot myself. If I boot myself, are you still going to be here? And I can come back in?
Yeah, man, I'll be here.
Okay, let me do that.
K-Log, that was a good idea, and then he left you up there.
All right, do I still sound like a weirdo?
It's still a little choppy, and I can hear myself in the background.
Yeah, still hadn't figured out that headphone situation, so I could just might have to make do, man. Does it sound terrible, like broadcast killing?
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
K-Log says yes, and since he's the only person here, I guess I got 2 against 1. Well, shit. Okay.
Dude, K-Log, thank you for showing up. We're talking about aliens and shit now. We talked about all kinds of stuff. Well, for anybody that might be listening in the future, yeah. So I don't think we should always rush to aliens as an answer for anything that coming out of ancient culture. I think human culture and civilization is much further back than we currently believe, or that modern science currently modern archaeology allows at this moment in time. I think that's another part of the arrogance of humanity. I'm actually thinking about writing a science fiction series that involves or incorporates that line of thinking. So I'm going to have civilizations pre-Younger Dryas and before the great floods, the last disasters of Earth. And one of the things that I'm trying very hard to do with that series is write about a technological track that doesn't involve anything that we would perceive as advanced technology. I'm not talking about running electricity through copper wires, using silicon microchips, things like that. I'm trying to think of a more natural technological track, and I think it can be done using vibration, sound, things like that, crystals. I'm probably going to pull from some of the books that I've read on ancient technological theory and ancient aliens and stuff like that, but not so much the alien aspect. I think that, in my belief, and my theory, is that civilizations can develop different technological tracks, and that the one that we grasped onto that put us to where we are now was the harshening electricity, controlling lightning, so to speak. And that has led us to where we are. But what if the root of a technology was in crystal, harnessing sunlight, or vibrational technology? What if that was the founding principle of a society, of the growth of a civilization? What would that end up being? So I'm playing around with that.
Sounds,
yeah, I'm going to play around with that. And it's going to be called. I think I'm going to call it Incarnates. It's going to be kind of a series about souls that are dedicated by, not sure how I'm going to set it up, if as a supreme being or fates or whatever, that reincarnate through every generation. And when they are needed, when there is a calamity about to happen of some sort, then they are awakened. And when they're awakened, they're kind of like sleeper cells inside of each person. And when they awaken, they take over the personality and the construct of the person that they were born into. And that may not happen at every time, only when there are great calamities about to arise. And so what I want to do with that series is the next calamity is going to be like 2150 or 2050 or something like that. But as my main characters awaken and the other personality begins to take over, I want to transport back in time 10, 20, maybe 30,000 years to various different civilizations and other times to which they have had to come around, and that they have failed in each of those incarnations to defeat the incoming calamity, or they succeeded in helping humans or civilizations to survive. But again, everything is a cycle. The theme is going to of the story is going to be everything is a cycle. Everything happens in a pattern, and so even if you survive one Armageddon, there's going to be another one down the road at some point. Then you're going to have a life, death, and rebirth period over and over and over again. So I'm looking forward to writing it. I'm doing the outlines now. I'm just taking my time in the development of different technological tracks for ancient civilizations, and trying to provide the reader with enough plausible reason to believe that there are no remnants of those civilizations around. Because let's say, you find a perfectly smooth stone bowl from 13,000 years ago. Someone can look at it and go, oh, well, that's just a bowl. Like, yeah, but that was actually a part of a machine that used to exist that would help in moving buildings, moving rocks, moving vehicles, things like that. So I want to make it plausible. It's good science fantasy, but I just want to make it plausible enough that it's something that the reader can enjoy. And people with tinfoil hats can enjoy.
Have you heard about Edward Leeds-Scallan in Coral, Florida? He built like this huge megalithic castle, And he says that he discovered the methods that the Egyptians used in constructing their pyramids,
Hmm.
and it is vibrational. It's sound levitation. Have you heard about any of that?
No, but I have heard of the theory of levitation through vibration, and that's one of the things that I'm reading about, that I'm going to be using in my book. Yeah, that makes so much sense to me. There are, oh God, I know that there's a Buddhist monastery where all the monks will sit down and hum at the same time, like 100. I don't know for sure. It was like 100 of them or something, and
Yes.
they are able to move objects with sound, by concentrated sound. All of them, basically in the using the same vibrational tone. I think that's fascinating.
Oh yeah, and then even talking about harnessing lightning, uh, Tesla is probably the most advanced brain that we've had in the past 100 years.
Oh man,
Um,
could you
there
imagine
was,
where we'd be?
yeah, if they just let him do his thing and
Hmm.
the powers that be weren't so greedy. Do I still sound fucked up?
Yeah, but it's not as effed up.
Okay, okay, yeah, it's raining pretty hard here. I live in the Puget Sound area of Washington, so shout out to my Washington peeps. Shout out to K-Log and his mom. Thanks for braving the weathers, buddy. Appreciate you being out here. Yeah, yeah. So it's interesting. In recounting the Gilgamesh epic, first, I mean, there's a lot of things that we can say. The Gilgamesh epic outdates the Bible by a couple thousand years, and yet we have a flood story there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's the second Epic of Gilgamesh. That's the second oldest text, I think, in world history. The
yeah,
surviving Is that surviving text?
yeah. They found it in an Assyrian library. King Ashurbanipal had like a huge collection of writings, and his famous saying was that he could read the language from before the flood.
Mm.
So, uh, and it's also interesting, the most cultures and over the planet, all over the planet, have a flood story. So who knows? Perhaps our ancestors were located in this flood region, and then we had to disperse, or we were purposefully taken to different areas. I always wondered about that. So, like, the evolution of race, was that something that happened because you had a population here and a population there, and then they changed, or were we bred with or crossbred with something? What do you think?
Those are interesting cases. I think. Oh, I can hear myself again.
Let me mute it. Go ahead.
All good. I think that I believe in the sporadic evolution theory. I think right now, with all the available evidence, I think human beings came out of Africa and then spread across the world. But there's also evidence to suggest that it may have not been the case, that several different pockets of people evolved or spawned out of different parts of the world. Um, and I think that also goes back to uh, my belief that we are all basically just this hodgepodge of different races of man, different cousins that have just become what we are. I believe that the root was Cro-Magnon, but that we have many different other types of humans mixed into our DNA. As far as being bred or conditioned, like like husbandry, like genetic engineering, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um, I need evidence. I would need evidence to seriously believe in that. But there are lots of very cool stories out there about, and just enough, evidence of something to propose a theory involving the manipulation of human evolution through exterior means. And one of those, is the circles in South Africa. There are these circles in South Africa. Nobody
I've
knows
read
where they
about
come
those.
from.
The Adams
So
calendar. Yeah.
yeah. Nobody really has any idea what they are. And one of the cool things um, about satellite technology and mapping from satellites is you get to look at all of these series of roads and grids, ancient depressions that were once roads and grids that existed in South Africa, and that supposes that there was a huge civilization that existed down there, now lost. And if that is the case, what kind of civilization are we talking about? What kind of technology did they have? Were they simply like stone or bronze age? Um, who knows? We don't. If there is evidence out there for a more advanced civilization at that time, then it's been suppressed. Um, and I wouldn't be surprised. Actually, I wouldn't be too surprised about that. But all over the world, there are different locations and different tales from ancient civs that involve the manipulation of man through God's chosen, like angels, things like that. And it really comes down to this: do you think that people at those times had such crazy imaginations, had just these wonderfully beautiful imaginations, the expansive ideas, that they could have thought of something like this that would give us in this day the impression that there were some kind of alien manipulation going on? Or are we looking at ancient civs and their texts and what they've left behind through the lens of humans who have gone through several different evolutions in perception? I mean, just from ancient Greece to now, there have been several changes in growth in the brain. For instance, the ability to see things in the abstract, which was given to us during the time of Plato, I believe. And before then, everything was very, very exact. Fire meant fire. The hunt meant the hunt. A cloud was a cloud. And then you get into ancient Greece and the ability to think in abstract thought. And now you can use metaphors, and you can tell a tale with that wasn't being strict and rigid. It was trying to explain to you another perspective or perception through the use and manipulation of words and literature. So it's difficult when you look back. Were ancient peoples who were saying that angels were coming down and working amongst the humans and creating these events? Were they being literal? Were they literally seeing these things? And if they were literally seeing these things, were they beings from another planet, another dimension? I mean, you can't leave dimensional possibilities out. I think it's pretty much been proven through
Right,
quantum theories. Through quantum theories and quantum technologies that that's been, and then quantum technology, not technology, but quantum theory has been around for well over 100 years now. That there are different layers to existence. So who we are now, just outside the box for a second, if you go back to the 1970s and look at scientific data from that time, scientific weather theory, they suppose that where we are now, we would be in a new ice age. We were going to go into a new little ice age right now. That's where we were headed. And that's what they were thinking in the 1970s. And then you get into the 80s, 90s, and it's global warming. And now it's climate change and the world's getting hot. Obviously the earth is getting warmer. The ice caps are receding. But the perception in science at the time of the 70s and the data that they had acquired and looked at due to the knowledge that they had at the time of that was we were heading toward an ice age. Turns out the earth's getting hotter. It's not going to get colder. So are we looking at basically data from ancient times, ancient tablets, those stories, and are we seeing them through the lens of a 21st century society who has vastly different abilities and as far as looking at data, understanding it, perception, just the change from ancient Greece to now has brought us so many different ages, theocracy, the Renaissance, the technological revolution, the industrial age.
Well, that's the thing is like some sometimes our ancient ancestors are treated as like a childlike and just dumb. And then somebody invented the wheel, and then somebody invented agriculture, and then now we're playing with robots on the moon. I don't think our ancestors were any less intelligent than we
Right.
are. They just they didn't have the same tools or the same context.
The same context, I think, is very important. I think they were just as smart as we are. We could go back in time and do what they did, and I think there's a strong possibility that if you went back 20,000 years and snatched somebody up and brought them up here as a kid and raised them in our society, that they'd be able to do and think of the things that we do. It's just the perception, the ability to think in different modes.
The Encino Man theory, right?
Yeah, I honestly, yeah. It just like it's difficult for, let's say, a person who was raised in the 60s to grasp internet technology. It would be difficult for someone in the it would be more difficult for someone 1,000 years ago to to even understand that, and then 2,000 years ago to understand that. But still, if you were to pluck somebody out of 1820 and bring them to 2020 and gave them a year, they would acclimate. Humans we've always been intelligent. We've always been innovative and creative.
Yes.
So I don't think our ancestors were stupid. Childlike in the respect that they were more in tune with the natural comings and goings around them, the natural world. Yeah, absolutely. I think you take somebody from the 21st century who's not someone who, is a survivalist, and you put them back then, they're screwed. You take somebody from the inner city and throw them back 20,000 years ago, they're fucked. They're dead. They're not going to make it. They're not going to survive.
Absolutely. And I think it would be interesting if we went back 20 and 30,000 years ago, maybe to a civilization where they had high technology. So what if you took somebody who had like crystal-based vibrational tech and you brought them here, and then they look around and like, what the fuck are you guys doing?
Yeah, they might see it just as magic. They might look at it like it's magic.
Or like we're digging up fossil fuels and burning them in cars to move when they have a different way of doing it.
Which is some of the dumbest fucking thing to be doing. That's so ineffective. I'm sorry, I was segueing, but
you're good, man.
I think that explosion-based propulsion is some of the worst idea. This is one of the worst ideas that we've ever invented.
Well, absolutely, and it's just that idea of having a meterable planned obsolescence thing. So, like, yeah, your thing can move, but you need my shit to make it move, and then your thing's going to break anyway, so you're going to have to buy a new thing in 10 years.
Well, it's also the idea of supply and demand, someone controlling a natural resource and being able to monetize that natural resource. That's why it's as big as it was. Okay, and we had cars that ran on steam in the 1950s. Where are they at? In a vault somewhere, never to be used again.
Water cars. There was actually a dude out in Australia who was killed for doing stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean that's legit. That's not to me. That's not conspiracy. That makes sense. It's if there is a limited form of energy that has been discovered, it will not get released until those that have it figure out a way to basically nickel and dime you for it. That's
the big word that I've heard about how come disclosure hasn't been openly offered by world governments is because it's clear that whoever they are, they've been here either longer than us or at least at the same time as us. But if they are here and they have been here, how did they get here? Oh, well, they fly on ships. Well, what does the ship use? It doesn't use fucking gas and liquid oxygen, I'll tell you that.
The element 115 is something that Bob Lazar, man, that's the strongest case in my opinion for that. And you've also had other people who have come out and basically said, yeah, we're not alone. And various governments over the last 2 decades have. Who was he? In the Mexican cabinet, the head of
I was just going to mention
God.
that.
Head of
Yeah.
trade. Not wasn't trade. It wasn't trade. It was recreation. Not recreation. I can't think of it. I can't think of the title. But there was a Mexican official 12 years ago, 11, 12 years ago, who said that they had found what he called landing pads in the jungle. And so, I
When you
mean, that's
saw
pretty
that,
cool. I don't
that
know if
did
he's a nut. I don't
sound
know if he's a nut. I haven't researched the guy, but I thought that was cool that an official of a major government came out and said, "Yeah, we found landing pads in the in the rainforest." So, I always like hearing that. I like when the Swedish government came out and said, "Yeah, we've got videotape of unidentified flying objects. We can't explain their propulsion. We don't know where they come from, and nobody's claimed them." So there you go. The the Iraqi Air Force, they same thing. They've just flat out said there's objects that have been flying through our airspace, and we don't know what they are. And here's the videos. Like those types that type of information is out there. Now, could it be possible that there is a some kind of a air force that exists on this world that has been developed that has not been let known to the public? I mean, stealth bombers were around long before anybody knew they were around. That argument is valid, I think. But
it's,
there are some.
it's like that Michael McKinnon dude who hacked into,
Oh,
and he was talking about the space fleet that we have, like the
yeah.
non-terrestrial officers, that kind of shit.
Well, we always find out things about 20 years later. Like I'd say that's about right. That's about on par. The late 60s, the government had the internet, albeit it wasn't the internet that we understand it to be. It was a military use, and it connected military installations to one
It was
another.
Al Gore's internet.
Yeah, it was Al Gore's internet. Yeah, I mean that was around. The official, if you look online for the beginning of the internet, would state that it was universities communicating back and forth using phone lines and computers to one another, and that's the beginning of the internet. But no, it was in the late 60s. It was government technology, and so I think it's pretty safe to say, given like I said, the stealth bomber. We didn't find out about the stealth bomber until decades later. We didn't know that it existed. Um, so if President Trump right now is introducing the seal for the fifth wing of the military, the Space Force, it would not surprise me if we found out in 20 more years that in 2005 we already had ships that were leaving and going into high orbit or low or going to low orbit. I wouldn't be surprised. That's pretty much where I stand with it. I think we don't get told everything. We don't get told everything about what happens, and that's where the problems come. That's where the little chinks in the armor when the government releases things that they know they shouldn't release. People always talk about Area 51. I think Area 51 was
Abandoned years ago for that.
yeah. That it's somewhere else now. if they're working on that stuff, it's someplace else. There was an article I read about Chinese. Oh God, I wish I could remember the name of the town. I knew the name of the town, that they had developed a way to create pig-human hybrids, and they had not let the embryos grow beyond a certain point, which is bullshit. Like I said, when you hear a little bit out of something from a government, when you hear just a little bit, all right, and they say that's the whole story, that I bet you that's only a tenth of the story. But the story was, I think it was just this past year in 2019, that they had pig human embryos that had lived and grown to a certain point before they were destroyed. If we're hearing that, coupled with what they were talking about, cloning sheep 15 years ago, and there was the big push for stem cell research back in '98. We're much further along than we're being told, in areas like that. So that might just be my natural distrust of the government or world governments. But they've hardly ever had full disclosure with people. So
It reminds me of how, like, a few years ago they came out with something called Roswell Case Closed, and they were like, yeah, you know, it was a bunch of dummies that we threw out. Har har har. Um, that's an interesting case. There's actually a really famous picture where General Ramsey is sitting there holding a memo that says that there were alien bodies, and it's from the original photograph. He just happened to have it. So yeah.
Yeah, would you ever hear the story about the craft that crashed in the late 1800s, and actually, and Star Trek did an episode based on that story when Data had landed. He was doing something. He was trying to clean the water source of a town that
From
was
radioactive waste. Yeah.
radioactive, and that right. Okay, so you remember that story.
Yes.
So there was a story about a late 1800s. I think it was down south, I think Texas area maybe, where a craft had crashed, and the townspeople found the alien, and they didn't know what to do with him. He was not terrestrial. I think there were articles in newspapers about it. They didn't know what to do, and it died, so they buried it. And then at some point, someone had come along and dug up this grave and taken the body and taken all the evidence and buggered off. And whether that was government or not, whatever. But like we have stories like that. Another segueing off to another interesting story about the giants that were being held, giant bones that were being held in the Smithsonian. You ever hear that one?
Yeah, there's actually worldwide stories about red-headed giants. But go ahead. I want to hear what you've heard.
Well, it was this apparently, and it was written about in papers, over 100 years ago, that archaeologists were finding burial sites of huge people, like 10, 11, 12-foot people. And they were digging these sites up, and they were taking them to the Smithsonian, and they were being archived there and researched. And then just out of the blue, 1 year, nothing. Like nothing was talked. It was never talked about again. And supposedly to this day, those bones still exist. That evidence still exists. But because of the impacts of on human evolution and world history, the scientific community or the government or whoever decided that that information should not come out. I don't know what exactly that kind of an impact would have. I can't see what the issue would be if there was a race of giants. A lot of ancient civilizations have talked about the races of giants. The people in the Germanic areas have always talked about the ancient Germanic areas talked about the race of giants. It's
in the Bible too.
Right. It's in the Bible. It's in a lot of ancient texts. I don't see what I don't understand what the problem would be. So I tend to look at that as possible misinformation. I don't know. But I just think it's an interesting story. I think it's,
There's another really interesting story out of China. Have you heard of the Dropa?
No.
Okay, so the Dropa, and this is like in Tibet or some border region there. This was a couple hundred years ago. They supposedly crashed, and they were hunted by the locals because they looked different. The thing about the Dropa is they actually survived and set up like a little village or something, and there are pictures of the Dropa, and they're funny looking people. I wish I knew how to work
like photographs, like photographic pictures.
Yeah, like there was a king and a queen Dropa, and they were wearing fucked up things, but you could look at their bone structure and their height and tell that they were not exactly human. Yeah, it's interesting stuff. And then supposedly they had written down their history on these. They look kind of like, yeah, the Dropa stones. Yeah.
Yeah, otherwise known as the Dropa stones, or Dropka stones, are said by some ufologists and pseudo-archaeologists to be a series of at least 716 circular stone discs dating back to 12,000 years ago. Well, that's pretty interesting. Hold on, Wikipedia. Oh, I hate Wikipedia.
They always ask me for money.
I said, no, well, I don't. I've done research through Wikipedia, and what I found is that they often cater to some fake newsery. God, for God's sake, go to the. Never mind. Hold on. Subject for another time. The hieroglyphic-like marks are said to be found in these grooves. No record has been found on the stones being displayed in any of the world's museums. I was actually more interested in looking at the Dropa people. You said that there were pictures?
Yeah, there's like a king and a queen. If I can find it, I'll send it to you.
Dropa stones. Let's see. King. Chinese stone conspiracy. Here we go. Here's some pictures. Okay, well, here, I'll share this. Hopefully, okay, yep. Had to check. Had to make sure there was no boobs on this screen share because I did that once.
You showed YouTube some boobs?
I no, it was like full on lightsaber dildo in a inside of it. Yeah. I had to pull that video down, and there we go. It's down bottom there, buddy. Yeah, we got some weird kids and stuff in there.
Yeah, so you can, if you look at that big picture, right, with the headdress and that's supposedly the king and queen Dropa, and you can tell that they don't look Chinese like you would think a Chinese person would look.
Oh, that's
now, I'm not saying, now I'm not saying that these people are fresh off the ship, but whatever came off the ship probably, found other ways of reproducing, and here we have these odd-looking people. So what do you think? What do you make of that, man?
Oh, that's some weird-looking people. Oh, look, there's an alien head. Look at that. Humanoid from the Roswell UFO crash 1947 scam from the book UFO Prognosis. I don't know what that is. It's a hell of a...
I think that's highly suspect, man. That looks like a...
No, I'm trying to find... Well, it's all in the UFO section, so I'm trying to find a better, bigger picture. No, I guess they're all tiny. I don't know. I'd like to learn more about it. That sounds pretty cool. I never heard of the discs before.
Yeah, there's a couple of them in the second row there.
Yeah, but if they're dated at, if they're dated at 12,000 years ago, that's pretty awesome. I love anything ancient from that period. Oh, from the Younger Dryas and beyond. Oh, shit, yeah, man. I think there was
the story that I heard was that there was the Chinese version of the Boy Scouts or whatever. They were up in the caves, and they found a bunch of these things, and they found a bunch of tiny bones, and they took them to whatever fucking China University, and the dude working on it figured out that it was as old as you're talking about, but because of the implications of what it said, censoring, hidden from public view, blah blah blah. I found it on some weirdo like random website, but the interesting thing about this case is that there's tangible evidence.
I have to check that out. The only problem with ancient civ like that is you need some kind of a Rosetta Stone. You need something. I mean, it's a break. Let's see, what's that? Oh, that's a pre-Columbian generic disc.
Like some kind of corner. Yeah,
that's pretty cool.
Older ones, the fuzzy like 1970s looking quality. Those are the ones.
Yeah, that's I don't know, but I might check it out. Looks like I'm gonna have to go check out an Ancient Aliens episode. Or who else would you suggest?
You should probably talk to Gary and Doomcock about it.
Oh yeah. Hail Exozone. Yeah, go check out Exozone.
Love that shit.
Me too.
Well, we got Tommy in the house. How you doing, Tommy? I apologize for my audio quality. But we do have the smooth butteriness of author Stephen Walton. So
that does sounded kind of gay. All right.
he's smooth, he's buttery, he's all yours, internet.
Oh man. Okay. All right. I'm getting all kinds of stuff.
Well, and that's what's interesting about this topic is there's so much evidence. Another one, you were talking about pyramids. There's a huge pyramid in Bosnia, bigger than the Giza pyramid.
Oh
bigger
yeah,
than
the one that's covered in earth. Is that what you're talking about? That one? Hold on, let me look it up. Hold on.
Actually, the Bosnian government will allow its citizens to like come and help excavate this thing. And
Oh, really?
they're thinking that this pyramid is some type of power plant. So if and it's mostly because of its placement. There's another picture that shows like the pyramids and then a computer motherboard that's lined up similarly. So if the pyramids somehow were actually power plants instead of royal tombs, and that's very suspect too. Yeah.
Look at that. Damn, look at that.
Isn't that nuts? It's bigger than Giza.
Wow. And they're excavating it? Is that what you said, Immortal?
Yes, they still are. I heard about this probably 5 years or so ago. So the story goes that the person who cited this initially thought it was a mountain, but then if you look at it clearly, it's geometric.
Oh yeah.
Because it's in Bosnia and because it contradicts. That dude that's always like on the Egypt shows whenever they're digging up like a new chamber or something. They have such an ego about it that they don't want to acknowledge this stuff. And that's in Bosnia.
Well, they can't. That's the problem with modern scientists, archaeologists. Like they don't want to change. Everything, all their papers that they have been citing and writing, and like they don't want to have to admit that they're wrong. A lot of them. There are some that do, but there's a lot of them they don't want to have to admit being wrong about something, and that's really holding us back. That ego is holding us back in many areas of science. Does it have a river around it too?
And the control of so it's many areas, the control of our story, our history. They want to be able to definitively say, yep, we were a pond of goo, like Q might say. And then we turn into frogs, and then we turn into lizards, and then we turn into monkeys, and now we use our opposable thumbs to conquer the world. But stuff like this, like if you go by our modern knowledge, they don't know how to do this now. But somehow, thousands of years ago, these things were all over the place.
With different technologies, man. That's why I really believe in there have been different technological tracks, and whether through destruction or famine or calamity or just the rise and fall of civilizations, we lose different technologies. Since the industrial age of big moving parts and explosions in order to make things happen, I mean that's been our bread and butter for the last 200-300 years, maybe almost 400 years, and that track has led us to where we are. But if different technological tracks had survived or had flourished, who knows where we would be. I don't think it's really hard for me to believe that it's just hard for me to believe that 100 humans with a bunch of sticks and logs and pulleys could have moved those massive blocks of granite. I believe that human ingenuity could have conceived of the mathematical equations involved in putting together something like the pyramids, but there's something lost. There's some kind of lost tech. I know one person cited, I think it was comics, and my friend Mike Russell. They said that a new discovery had been made on how the the blocks had been cut, that they had made grooves and then used a certain type of pitch and fire to heat rocks to fracture that broke them apart. That's plausible. I mean, I could see people doing that, but when it comes to moving some of these foundational stones from Greece,
thousands of miles away or hundreds of miles away.
Right. I don't see it. I just don't see a bunch of people, with ropes and, just throwing logs underneath a big rock and pulling it and using stone and wood, pulleys. And I don't see that. I need more convincing. I don't see that being plausible explanation to how some of these ancient monoliths were built, these megalithic structures. In some cases, perhaps, yeah, but not the Giza pyramids. I mean, I don't care how many thousands of people you got working on that. Raw manpower will get you pretty damn far, but only so far.
Well, if it took like 20 or 30 years to do it, but then there's even bigger megalithic structures like the Trilithon in Jerusalem, and then you got those things in like Peru where you can't even stick a knife between the blocks because they're fit together so perfectly. And it's like laser precision,
Machu Picchu. Look at Machu Picchu. You can tell the difference between the original builders and the builders who came after and tried to add on or repair what was originally done. You have blocks that are up in those mountains that are so seamless. They were formed together like clay, as if, they were molten at one point and then shaped together, or some kind of something crushed and smooth without breaking those blocks into perfectly fitted positions. There's a technology that's missing. There's something that's missing. It wasn't just somebody with a freaking bronze hammer and a chisel doing that. There was something else involved. And again, I go back to something like resonance fields. I think that ancient peoples were much more in tune with the natural, with Earth, with the natural powers of the Earth. The magnetism of it. We have lost something there between then and now, a technology or an understanding with natural sciences.
And it's the same thing in Giza. My belief is that some other technology built the main pyramids, and then you can see where humans went through and tried to copy that, and you get things like the bent pyramid, where they realized halfway through it that they had the wrong angle, so they had to make it more conical.
Right.
But it's sloppy looking compared to what they're calling the King's Pyramid. Right?
Yeah.
I don't think they're tombs at all.
You look at, there is a progression that can be seen, as I said before, between from the mastabas on, but you get to a certain point, and no matter how smart these people were at the time, there were devices that were being employed. There was something that was being done that has been lost through time. And I mean, you look at I know a lot of people, some people might give me shit for this, but I really believe the harnessing of electricity is a lot earlier than we suspect. There
were Egyptian hieroglyphics where it shows light bulb things, and then they also say that those long passages, there's no soot on the ceiling, so they're not using torches. There had to be an illumination source because those things were closed in. Their passages. Yeah,
I know. And some people look at the Baghdad battery and go, "Yeah, but that was just, that was look just even the idea of the Baghdad battery, of using juice to create juice, right, to create an electrical field strong enough to manipulate gold, or to make jewelry. All right, think about that. You don't think was that Was that something that came from other ideas that were being done at the time? I mean, is that like an isolated incident? There's hundreds of these things.
Well, and if you go back to the writings, it clearly says that we were taught. Have you heard about that temple of Abydos where there's like helicopters and zeppelins and things that are
I might
depicted?
have, but I
Yeah.
can't recall.
Well, do an internet search real fast. Temple of Abydos. A-B, Abydos.
Evidus?
Abydos, yeah.
Let me look it up. All right. Evidus. Abydos. Abydos. There we go. A-B-Y-D-O-S. Okay.
It's duck season. It's Abydos season. Yeah.
All right. The temples of Abydos, ancient Egypt online. And according to them, located in northern Upper Egypt, Abydos has been a sacred site to Egyptians since pre-dynastic times. Wepawet, the jackal-headed god, held it sacred, and it was believed that he opened the way to the world of the dead through Abydos. The ancient Egyptians have always held their dead in high regard and revered them with respect. Okay, let me look at some. In Circa 1300 BC by Seti I and his son Ramses II, the main monument of the Temple of Seti I contains many detailed reliefs that are among the best in the New Kingdom. They originally stood 550 feet in length and 350 feet wide. The temple was dedicated to the gods Horus, Isis, Osiris, Amun-Ra. Oh God, here's a good one. Ra, Horkathi, and Fat. Or I always say that wrong. I say Fat, but it's PTH. Is that Ta?
Ta, yeah.
Is it Ta?
That actually, that's somebody who predates the main gods. It's like their daddy. It's like their Saturn or their.
Gotcha. The Temple of Seti I is a little out of the ordinary because it is L-shaped, unlike the other Egyptian temples. The entrance of the temple, the north end, the remains of a pylon and a forecourt contain reliefs of Ramses II defeat at Kadesh. Trying to find some. God, this place is huge, man. The Egyptians were something else. Now, let me screen share this so y'all can see this. The Egyptians, man. They knew how to make something last. Yeah, look at that. It's beautiful.
Yes. Now, the really interesting stuff, so I did a Google search, and I typed in Abydos, and just go to the images, and on the bottom second row, those are the helicopters and the vehicles I was talking about.
Let me see. Images. I guess I have to change over to this.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Oh, damn. Look at that shit. What the?
What is that, Steve? Look at that.
Oh my God, that's a helicopter.
Uh-huh.
That's a car of some kind.
And there's like it looks like either a UFO or a submarine or the Jetsons car, I wonder if it turns into a briefcase.
Wow.
That's some trippy shit, man. And this is carved in stone, thousands of years old. So you're talking about man's ability to communicate what he saw thousands of years ago. What was flying in the sky back then, man?
I don't know.
It's trippy shit.
God damn.
Yeah. And this is one of those things too that they want to sweep under a rug, or they want to say like, oh, the stone's worn out or whatever. But you also have those it kind of reminds me of like the Vedas, where they're talking about these giant flying things that annihilated cities.
Like something like this. I can believe people did that. I totally can see that.
Oh, sure.
Carvers did that. But when you're talking about the Giza pyramids and these huge structures, I can't.
Yeah.
I mean, look at that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That looks like some Raiders of the Lost Ark shit.
Yeah, man. It's gorgeous.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And again, done in the dark, right? Unless they had some sort of light source that doesn't scorch the top of the roof.
Well, I'm sure you've heard about the power plant theory. I think you mentioned it earlier.
Yes, I had. There's a lot of funny things about Egypt, and especially if you want to get into some ET connection, look up Akhenaten.
You gonna spell that for me?
Hang on, I have to type it. I have a better
I am very, very American and very, very white. I am not spelling Akhenaten.
Okay, Akhen like Nancy.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah, Akhenaten. Okay. So look at just look at the guy's head. Okay, look at his head, and you see that how they have that elongated cranium. It kind of reminds me of those skulls that they dug up in South America.
Oh yeah, those things, man.
Yeah.
Now that is some trippy shit.
Yeah. So Akhenaten is famous for a couple of things. He introduced monotheism into Egypt and was very unpopular for doing so. After he died, they went back to polytheism. But he is also famous for being the father of King Tut.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh. So just looking at this dude, he doesn't look like we do.
That's a female. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No, he does not.
He looks, I mean, he's probably a variety of human, but he's not the type of variety that we are.
Right.
And there's a big thing about Egypt being kind of like a land temple dedicated to Orion. So the pyramids line up in the belt, and you can find other images of that where the entire constellation is represented. Even like the part where the River Nile is like the Milky Way galaxy and all that. So Orion and Sirius were a big deal to these guys.
Yeah, look at the kids. Even the kids were displayed with the elongated skulls.
Isn't that trippy?
Look at that. It's Amen Ra. For those of you Christians out there, that's where Amen comes from.
Yes. I think that's so funny.
Yeah.
And especially like when Mormons come to my door. I'm like, you don't even know what you believe, do you? But they're like 15 and they're just trying to, sir?
Most honest Christians I ever met were Jehovah's Witnesses, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
They were the most honest ones I ever met.
Yeah.
They were like, nope, we don't celebrate Christmas. We don't celebrate Easter. Why not? Well, because they're pagan holidays. Well, you're damn right about that.
You're like, thank you. I've been
let's sit down.
Right,
let's sit down and have a conversation now. You're absolutely right.
Well, and it's funny. So King Tut's really famous because his sarcophagus was solid gold and blah, blah, blah. But you notice that they're not photographing him from the back.
No. I mean, has that ever been
like
done?
That blue picture, there's just like his front face. They don't want to show his occipital region. That's the college word for it.
All right. Well, let's see. Well, there's a statue of Tutankhamun.
Yeah, he's wearing a hat though.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think his physical remains exist somewhere, and it would be interesting to examine that.
It would be.
Or even if through could they sequence his DNA, something like that.
Hmm.
I've seen instances where strange bones exist, and for some reason they just don't want to run the tests on them.
Yeah, I mean, if there's a so there he is.
Good old Tut.
Yeah,
Look at that guy.
his face is long like his father, but his father's
His
huge.
father does not look human. I mean, he looks human enough, but not.
Well, isn't the story that Akhenaten was deformed?
That's
And
probably the story.
Yeah, and he
I
wasn't.
think he's probably like Syrian or something. Not the country, the star.
Was Tutankhamun the son or the nephew of Akhenaten?
I want to say he's the son.
Well, it's asking the question.
Uh,
No, but look at this cranium though back here is different a little bit. Look at that.
yeah. Well, but you see how they're carefully selecting the angle?
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and it's funny, they're also showing him a lot paler than I think he would have been, unless they know something. But there's a lot of stories floating around Africa about people from other stars, and Orion and Sirius come up quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there was one of the things about ancient Egypt is it was the melting pot of the world, much like America is. There was a lot of different people that came through and were adapted in. I mean, you got the what were they called? The pharaohs from Greece that lasted for 300 years.
Right.
After Alexander the Great came through, then you had the Greek line, the Greek lineage. And also you're looking at from the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, and there was the borders of Egypt changed. The people themselves changed due to war, takeovers, immigration. So like they're absolutely without a doubt there were pharaohs as dark as Wesley Snipes. But there were also pharaohs as light as the whitest dude. Like that was a region of the world. It was a melting pot. I mean, they were the trade of the Mediterranean for the longest time, the breadbasket of the Mediterranean and the Roman Empire. So I'm sorry, you just went into the coloration.
That is okay. I just and what would you give Stephen to be able to go and peruse the library at Alexandria?
Oh, let's see. Before the Muslims came in there and burned it down, I would have given anything. The information that was the cradle of information of the ancient world, and it was burned down. And you know why it was burned down? Because I forget his name. Because some Islamic general wrote in there and said, burn it down. But why, General? Because if it doesn't have any mention of Muhammad, we don't need it. And if it has mention of Muhammad, we already have it. Kill it all.
Such a loss. That's
completely
really one of the biggest crimes humanity ever perpetrated on itself.
Yeah, man. Yep. Insanity. But yeah, it's also the same civilization that said math was evil. So,
but it's funny too because Egypt took place after Sumer and Akkad. So what I've read actually is that the god Ta is synonymous with the god Enki.
Enki. Now we're going into territory that I know. Lodanis comes from the Mesopotamian mythology. Well, is an adaptation of Mesopotamian mythology.
Yeah. Well, that's why I found that Star Trek episode so interesting, because in a way they touched on all that, but they didn't quite go into it in the way that somebody like you and I would. I'm a big fan of Zecharia Sitchin. I don't think 100% of everything he wrote was correct, but even if like 90% of it was, or 80%, that's still a fundamental shift in our thinking. Yeah, he had a really good series. He called it the Earth Chronicles, and he kind of focuses on things that support his outlook and faith. He was a Jewish man, so he kind of plays up those ends, but he draws very credible parallels between Sumer Akkad in Egypt, and then even into South America. So it's interesting stuff. He needs to be read more.
Yeah, some other time we need to get into South America, talk about a little bit about ancient South America, because there's a lot of
Oh, we
weird shit.
will.
A lot of
Yeah,
weird shit.
I'm far from over with my broadcasting career, and once I understand how sound and headphones work, then I think we're going to have a good show. But on that note, we've been going about an hour and a half. I expect this to get more traction on the replay, but I want to thank my guest, Lodonis Raven Wolf, author Stephen Walton.
Thank you, buddy. Thank you very much. I figure if we were going to go into the mystical, I might as well use my mystical name. This is that's the name I gave myself when I became religious, and so yeah, that's about it. But you can find me on Author Stephen Walton, where I don't talk about this stuff. I actually talk about pop culture, entertainment. I'm gonna be doing a lot of Star Trek talk because I love Star Trek. Check me out on Twitter at Lodonis, and yeah, man. Remember, we do not kneel.
I appreciate that, man. And then you can catch us on Wednesdays and Saturdays on the Fourth Wave channel. Follow us on Twitter, follow us on YouTube, like, share, subscribe, mash that melee button, and we will talk to you guys later. Have a good one.
Hail.